Well, hello everybody and welcome to another episode, and today I'm going to show you 4 vintage lenses that are all available for less than £40 that work really beautifully on Fujifilm cameras. They just seem to lend themselves to the system and they create really nice images. Of course, you can use pretty much any vintage lens on your Fujifilm mirrorless, but I found these ones to work particularly well. So if you're looking for quality vintage lenses for not much money, check out this video. And we're going to begin with this lens. This is the Meyer-Optik Lydith f3.5 30mm, and it's not very much on paper. I guess it's a little bit slow at f3.5. 30mm is a fairly unusual focal length. That's on full frame, of course. When you put this onto an APS-C camera like the Fujifilm cameras, then the effective focal length becomes 45mm, I think that's right, and that brings it pretty near to my ideal focal length of 40mm. So this is a really good general purpose lens. Now, as I say, it's not that much on paper, but it does have a great reputation and it's held in pretty high regard by a lot of photographers. I shot this on my Sony A7 recently and it performed nicely enough, but I have to say I wasn't overly impressed. It wasn't particularly sharp. I did have to stop it down a little bit to get any reasonable sharpness out of it. And it seemed a little bit dull as well. I don't know, the images just, they just didn't have the clarity that I wanted. I was shooting in very poor light. It was a very cloudy day. There was about a mile of clouds stacked above us, and the light was very diffuse. It's the kind of day that we often get in the UK, and it's not great for photography. It does tend to mute colours down a little bit. It does tend to mute contrast a little bit, but nevertheless I did expect better results when I put this on the A7. So I didn't expect that much from it when I put it on the X-T3, but I was very pleasantly surprised. This lens works far, far better on the X-T3 than it did on the A7, certainly when I shot it. Wide open images are really sharp. Why? I don't really know. Maybe it's because the XT cameras are crop sensor cameras, so that they're looking through a more central portion of the lens, which tends to be sharper than the edges. That could account for it, or it could be something to do with the X-Trans sensor, which does have an inherent sharpness, I've found, but whatever the reason, the images that I shot on the X-T3 turned out much sharper than those I shot on the A7, and that's wide open. So I was very pleased with that. Colours were much improved as well. They had a real glow to them, a real liveliness to them. Far, far nicer than when I shot this lens on the A7. It was better light, I was shooting in bright sunlight, but nevertheless it was a significantly better image with regard to colour that came out of this little lens. Generally the images were much cleaner, much clearer, much brighter, and they had a real sparkle that was just lacking in the A7 images. Let me just show you the lens and we'll just have a little look at it. So there it is, and I reckon that's a pretty groovy looking lens. It's certainly got some classic style. It's got the aperture ring at the front there, and it's got the focus ring just behind it at the back here. Little difficult to find if you've got the camera to your eye, because they feel very similar and they're pretty close together, so it's easy to mistake one for the other. But they're pretty grippy, nice and easy to turn. This lens has a very close minimum focus distance, like a lot of the East German lenses, of 33 centimeters. I think it's 33. Yes, 33 centimeters. So that's a real bonus, and the effective minimum focus distance will actually decrease by around a third, because the X-T3 is a crop sensor camera. I know that point has caused a little bit of controversy and some people just can't see how it works, but it's not magic, it's just optics. When you put a smaller sensor through any given lens, the effective minimum focus distance goes a little bit closer depending on what sensor you're using, and also the effective focal length of the lens changes as well. Not magic, just optics, and it really does happen. Try it and you'll see it works. So this lens is really suited to the Fujifilm sensors, to the Fujifilm cameras. It just comes alive and it's a beautiful little thing on there. It'll even give you some blur too, which is pretty nice. It won't give you that much in general day-to-day photography, and it's not the kind of lens you'd buy to give you loads and loads of blur. But because of its short minimum focus distance, 33 centimeters, if you go close, yeah, you're going to get some nice blur out of it. And it is nice blur as well. It's pretty soft, it's not rough. It'll give you some separation. It'll give nice separation of the subject from the background. And yeah, it's a great little lens. And these are pretty cheap too, especially if you buy one in exact amount. Exacta lenses are cheaper. I don't know why, but they are. I bought this Exacta version recently for, I think it was £40. It was either £30 or £40. Either way, you really can't go wrong. So if you've got a Fuji camera and you're looking for a 40 or a 50mm equivalent lens, this is a really nice one to get. Highly recommended. Okay, so next we've got a lens that I found works really well on the street on Fuji X cameras and indeed other APS-C cameras. It's the Olympus 135mm f3.5. This is a very widely available lens. There's loads and loads of them around. They're not expensive. They go for around 30 to 40 pounds, and they're really nicely made, and they're Olympus, so you'll get some fantastic colours, sharpness and blur out of them. So it's a 135mm, and the equivalent focal length on APS-C is 180mm. So this lens has loads of reach for street portraits, and that's mostly what I used it for. I think it's good to have a lens with long reach if you're doing work on the street, if you're shooting on the street, because obviously we want to avoid upsetting anybody, getting in anybody's space, and this lens has the reach to do it. You can make some really nice artwork, some really nice candid portraits with this lens. It's another simple lens. It's not much on paper. It was, a consumer lens really. A little bit slow at f3.5, but it is beautifully made. It is good looking and it makes great images. Let's have a quick look. Right, so here's our Olympus 135, and it's got the Olympus house style that all the Zuiko lenses had. I do love this green marking it's got on here, and it's got orange and white markings here to differentiate the various things. I think this is differentiating meters from feet here. Very, very nicely made lens. Got a built-in hood because it does need that. It will wash out very quickly if you're shooting into the light, although that can be pretty nice, I find, if you're doing street portraits. These Olympus lenses have really nice coatings, and you know, even the humble ones, even the consumer ones, make really, really fantastic images, and I was very happy with those I got from this one. I've shot this one a lot on my Sony A7, used it extensively. In fact, it was one of the first vintage lenses that I bought. But for the purpose I used it, that is street photography, it really comes into its own on the X-T3. It's plenty sharp, wide open. Of course, it does get sharper like any lens if you stop it down a bit, but I never find the need to do that with this one. I think it's certainly as sharp as it needs to be for me, wide open, and it makes some very detailed images. It's got beautiful colour. Olympus lenses are well known for their handling of colour, the way they represent colour. They tend to push up saturation a little bit, they tend to push up contrast a little bit. They're pretty contrasty lenses, so they make good, strong, resonant, saturated images, which is just how I like them, actually. But I do like the way it behaves when it shoots into the light. When it just washes out, it loses contrast. But that can be really nice if you get it right, if it happens at the right point, if it just comes into the frame when you're shooting the right portrait, then it can make some really fantastic images in that way. Being a long lens, of course, it's got plenty of blur, and it's going to give you loads of separation, and that gives a very special look. It's not quite the same look of a faster telephoto lens, but it's very, very nice nonetheless. It gives a very sharp, delineated subject with lots of blur behind it, and it does have some compression effects as well, which longer lenses tend to have, where the background seems to come just that little bit nearer to the foreground and give that unique long lens look. You see it more on a faster lens, but this one does have a little bit. So it's a powerful tool for street portraits, at least that's what I found, and it's far, far lighter than a faster telephoto lens would be. I mean, I've shot recently with the TT Artisans f1.25 90mm. That's a monster of a lens. It's really, really large. This one gives broadly similar results, not the same results, of course. It can't reproduce that character, but broadly speaking, it gives similar results, and it's far smaller and lighter, far more portable too. So as I say, this one will go for around £30 to £40, and I consider it an absolute bargain. And if you want a good long lens for your Fuji X camera that will make you some beautiful street portraits, you could do a lot worse than get one of these. Alright, next we have another Olympus Zuiko lens, and this one is the 35 to 70mm f4, and I think it's a constant f4. Yeah, it's a constant f4, this one, which means that at both the short end and the long end, the aperture stays at f4. It doesn't close down as you go further towards the long end, which is a good thing. This is a very versatile lens. Again, it's not much on paper at f4. That is a little bit slow, I guess, if we compare it to a lot of other lenses, but it's really versatile. It's got a great zoom range and it makes fantastic images. It's 35 to 70 millimeters on full frame, so that gives it a 50 to 110 millimeter equivalent focal length range on APS-C. So on APS-C on your Fuji camera, or indeed any other APS-C camera, this lens behaves as though it's a 50 to 110 zoom. This is a really nice zoom lens with a very useful range on this camera, on the Fuji cameras. It gives images with fantastic colours. Zuiko lenses, as I say, are known for that. Colours seem beautifully balanced as well. Something just seems to happen with the glass and the sensor. They just seem to work really nicely together. Shall we have a quick look? Alright then. Okay, there's our Olympus zoom lens. And you can see this one has still got its past sticker on it here. A little bit worn, but that's nice to see. This is the zoom ring, so you zoom by turning this ring. It does extend a fair old bit, I don't know, about a third of its length again. And the aperture ring is at the back, just like it is on all of these Zuiko lenses. And it's got those wonderful green markings that I like so much, and the orange markings here on the distance scale. It's got a very nice big focus ring with this kind of diamond rubber grip on here that all the Zuiko lenses have, so that's really easy to find. That's very tactile. You can find that immediately when you've got your eye to the viewfinder, so that's really cool. So a very nice lens indeed. Pretty simple, you know, nothing much to write home about, but it really makes great images. And those images are really sharp, either wide open or stop down. Perhaps because it only goes to f4, I would think that has something to do with it, but whatever the reason, it's very sharp indeed. It gives very clear definition, you know, separation between the subject and the background, very clear definition of the subject, especially at the long end. And at the long end it gives plenty of blur as well, and that's pretty nice blur. It's very soft, very lovely, and no real surprises, no real harsh spots, so you can get plenty of blur out of this lens, especially if you go to the long end and stay reasonably close to your subject. Even at the short end, close to the subject, there's some lovely soft blur as well. So this is a lens that's not without a drop of the blurry stuff, and that is nice to see. It makes images with a lovely feel as well. It's one of those kind of indefinable qualities that it's rather hard to put your finger on, but I don't know, it just seems to somehow come together in this lens and makes images that just feel lovely. It's not too large or heavy either. It's an entirely portable lens. I think it's a bit heavier than the 135. Yeah, it is a little bit heavier than the 135. There's not much in it, but it is a little heavier, but even so, there's no problem carrying it around all day. Even with my recent back problems, which I've had plenty of, I didn't find this a burden to carry. It is a nice light lens. So it's a good, solid, reliable lens. It's a good workhorse of a lens, and I picked this one up when I don't want to shoot anything particularly fancy or exotic. I just want to make some nice images, and this is always at the ready and it will always do it. It's not too great in low light, but of course on a mirrorless camera you can whack up the ISO and compensate for that, so it doesn't matter so much as it did in the film days. f4 is really not such a handicap as it used to be, say, 30 years ago. It's a very practical optic. It's got a great zoom range. It's light and portable, and it makes great images. And maybe the best thing about it is it's cheap. I bought this one recently for £30. So, I don't know, maybe this one is the pick of today's bunch. A very nice lens indeed. Finally, a lens that I must admit I come back to time and time again. It's the Jupiter 8 50mm f2, and I think this is one of the nicest vintage 50s that you can buy. I've used this a great deal on my Sony A7, and it works really, really well on that camera. I've made some fantastic images with it on that camera, but I don't know, something magical happens when you put it on a Fujifilm camera. Let's have a quick look at this one. So there's our little Jupiter lens, and it really is a little lens, very small, being a rangefinder lens. This one's in aluminium finish, as you can see, polished aluminium. It's not terribly polished at the moment. It will have had, when it was new, it will have had a coating of varnish or something on here to preserve the shine, but this one needs a bit of a polish. It's a nicely made lens. It's got the focus ring at the back here and the stepless aperture ring at the front. They're also available in black body versions, and there's a version from the mid-50s that has a tab here, focusing tab. But a very, very nice little lens, and really one of my favourites, one that I come back to time and time again. And as I say, when you put this on a Fujifilm camera, something magical seems to happen. It's got an effective focal length of 75mm on APS-C, so that gives it a little bit of reach. Personally, I much prefer the 70 to 90mm range for general shooting. I think it's, you know, far nicer than 50mm. I do like having a little bit of reach in a lens, so this one's ideal for me on Fujifilm bodies. Its images have a very distinctive character. It's got very much a 30s feel, and that's probably not surprising because it's a copy of the Zeiss sonar from the 1930s, the Zeiss 50mm f2 sonar. So it really does have that old school feel. So if you want a bit of filmy, old time look in your images, this one will give it to you. It will give those digital images that old school look. It's got a fairly soft feel. It's a low contrast lens, although it is sharp. It's got very minimal coatings. It's not uncoated, but the coatings are minimal enough to give it a vintage feel. I don't think the coatings, such as they are really doing an awful lot. They're doing something, but they're not doing enough to give it a modern feel or a modern look. It has a glow like an uncoated lens. If you get a bright area of the image next to a dark area of your image, there's a very much a glow that uncoated lenses often give. I'm not talking about light bleed, which is what you get when a lens is dirty or filled with fungus or dust or something. That's where light just bleeds over from a light area into a dark area. This is a definite glow, like a light bulb, and it's a beautiful effect. I really like it. It's a rangefinder lens, so it's got a 3 foot or 1 meter minimum focus distance on full frame. That minimum focus distance is effectively, and please do note that use of the word effectively, nothing about the lens actually changes, but when you put it on APS-C, it has an effective minimum focus distance of 2 feet, or about 2/3 of a meter. So that's pretty good, because these rangefinder lenses, I think the one drawback of them, and their biggest drawback, is that you can't get terribly close to your subject. 1 meter is not very much of a close distance, but at least when you put it on APS-C, you do get that little bit closer, which is nice. It's a very small, very portable lens, being a rangefinder lens. Rangefinder lenses tend to be tiny, and you can see that this one really is tiny. It looks fantastic on digital cameras, and it gives a real blend of the old and the new, so, you know, it's a fantastic looking thing on a modern camera. I don't know of many lenses that are so affordable and will make images of this kind. The only one I can really compare it to is my f250mm scimitar, Leica scimitar, from I think the late 50s. That is a newer lens, but it does have kind of similar qualities, and I think it's comparable with this one. The Leica lens will cost about £300. This one will cost about £40 with a camera. You can even get a rangefinder camera with this one. And I got to be honest, I think the images this one makes are within an ace of those that the Leica lens makes. I really can't see much difference in it. So I think this is a fantastic lens. It's really good value. It's really small and portable. It looks great on a mirrorless camera, and it gives you some real vintage charm in your images. An absolute bargain. Again, very highly recommended. So there we are, 4 wonderful lenses that just seem to work nicely. I've found seem to work nicely on the Fujifilm X cameras. All available very cheaply, usually for £40 or less. And you know, if you want some really nice cheap glass, try one. I don't think you'll be disappointed. So that is it from me for now. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring that jolly old bell before you go. And if you'd like to support this channel and help it to grow and develop, you can do that at patreon.com/Zenography. Now I must give thanks to all of our patrons who help to support this channel. All of your help is very, very much appreciated. I couldn't do the things on this channel that I do if it wasn't for that support. So that really is very, very much appreciated. Thank you very much for your continuing support. And I really do mean that. That is a heartfelt thank you. So until next time, that's it from me. And I'll see you soon for some more Zenography.